Welcome to Breakout Investors. Today we are speaking with the management of Biomerica, ticker BMRA, specifically the company's CEO, Zack Irani. Joining me on today's call is Breakout Investor Florian. This call is being recorded on November 30th, 2022, and will be distributed via the Breakout Investor channel on YouTube and via our podcasting network. Look for Breakout Investor content wherever you subscribe to podcasts. We are on Apple, Spotify, and Audible, and most other platforms. Supporting materials for today's discussion will be posted on the Breakout Investors collaboration app and available on the app stores and at app.breakoutinvestors.com. The application and much of the research content is free. For those of you already on the Breakout Investors platform, you can share your questions for the company using the Discuss tab in Florian's breakout room. So let's get this call started with me handing the call over to Zack.
Well, thank you, and thanks for joining. So I want to walk you through Biomerica, who we are. This is going to be a little bit different than what you've seen in the diagnostic and tool space. I guarantee you it's worth some time, and spend some time on it. First, some housekeeping on forward-looking statements. I'll let you guys read those when you'd like. But this is the first time you're going to see a diagnostic product used to guide therapy. So in other words, it's using the diagnostic product to provide information and then use that information to actually be a therapy for that patient. So we like to say it's using science, diet, technology to really revolutionize different markets. And we're focused on GI to begin with. A little bit about the background of the company. Again, this will be the first ever FDA-regulated diagnostic guided therapy. We've been working with the FDA and the Rome Foundation, who I'll tell you a little about later. They're the ones who put together our clinical study that we just completed with very good results, and I'll share those with you. This is for a large and growing market. So IBS is about a $30 billion plus market. We have a very robust patent portfolio. So 11 issued patents, about 100 pending patents. Some significant milestones driving our growth is really the conclusion of our InFoods clinical trial, which was done at Mayo Clinic, Harvard, and some other leading institutions in the United States, and the planned launch of our laboratory developed test, which does not require FDA. So we will start generating revenues for this product prior to getting FDA clearance. We do have in FDA review right now an H. pylori antigen test, and I'll tell you a little bit about that and where that's going. And then our easy to detect colorectal cancer screening product and breast cancer screening product Aware. So it's a colorectal disease test and breast exam product I'll share with you. Those are in major retailers in the United States and hopefully soon to be in major retailers outside the United States. The capital structure of the company is very conservative. I'm the largest shareholder. I own about 10% of the company. There is no warrants, there's no debt, there's no preferred, there's no weird, any type of weird instruments out there. I make $135,000 at this company. I've purchased $225,000 on the open market with my own, straight out of the open market with my own funds. Okay, so I'm not here to collect a paycheck. Obviously, I'm here to actually make a difference in hopefully millions of people's lives and really change the way we think about how we can treat different diseases by utilizing information and being able to treat those patients by using that diagnostic information. What probably sets us apart the most for a smaller microcap company is the depth of our scientific leadership team. If you're not a GI doctor, you probably don't recognize these names, but if you were a GI doctor, you would recognize all these names on a first name basis. These are the US members of the Rome Foundation. The Rome Foundation sets the worldwide best practice guidelines. So best practice guideline means you're probably going to get insurance coverage and you're going to get a lot of adoption. Okay, so that's how healthcare in the United States works. So they set the worldwide best practice guidelines for irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, and I'll show you why that's important. They also happen to be the ones who got the drugs approved. Okay, they were the phase 2 or phase 3 primary investigators for those drugs. We conducted our clinical study at Mayo Clinic, Harvard, University of Michigan, and Texas Medical Center. But take a look at who did it. It's just the chief of gastroenterology, the current co-editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Gastroenterology. It's not just a fellow that's doing it. It's the top guys at the top institutions. Okay, so two sides of the business. One side is specialty diagnostics, which is like the H. pylori product, our colorectal cancer screening product, our breast self-exam product. And then the other side is InFoods, which is, a patented technology which enables diagnostic information to be used as a therapy. And I'm going to tell you what that is right now. So picture this, picture a IBS patient, of which in the United States, there's about 40 million. If you're based in Europe, it's similar numbers, 15 to 20%. Sometimes it's 10%, but it's a huge part of the population that has IBS, okay? Irritable bowel syndrome. And that IBS patient walks into a doctor's office. The nurse takes them back into the exam room. They either prick their finger to a venous draw. That blood is then sent out to a laboratory or performed right in the office when we do have a point of care product, which is under development. Okay. And what happens is the information that comes back out is personalized medicine for that IBS patient. Okay. So it measures the immune response to a predetermined IBS panel of foods, which is where our IP lies, that has set 95% confidence interval cutoffs. And a food that's positive is a food that's causing an immune response above the normal level. By removing that food out of that patient's diet, they should feel better. And we say they should feel better, but our clinical studies show that not only do they feel better, but they feel better and we do as good or better than most of the drugs that are in the marketplace. And I'll show you that data in a second. This has all been guided by the US members of the Rome Foundation, as well as feedback from the FDA. A little bit about IBS. IBS is the #1 common diagnosis by gastroenterologists in the United States. It's the 7th most common diagnosis by all physicians. These patients visit the doctors a lot more than normal patients and have a lot more direct healthcare costs. This is a $30 billion plus problem in the United States. Almost all of them will tell you foods are what trigger their symptoms. So again, in the United States, about 40 million patients. There's 3 types of IBS: constipation, diarrhea, and mixed, which is the poor guys who have constipation one week and diarrhea the next week. There is nothing available for those mixed patients, okay? The other thing to know about IBS is not only that it's a huge market, but it's not just constipation and diarrhea. It's the pain and bloating that turns constipation or chronic diarrhea into IBS. It's the pain and bloating that is the most discomforting for these patients, and they have to live with it day in and day out, which is very difficult. Okay. So far, so good. From a patient standpoint, it's pretty obvious that they're going to benefit from this without having any side effects. They're not going to have these every month a copay for the drug, and they're not going to have drug interaction problems. So pretty obvious from there. What's not obvious is that what I just walked you through earlier with that patient removing, coming into the doctor's office and removing, getting tested and then removing those foods out of their diet, is we just put together a recurring revenue stream for GI physicians. And remember, IBS is their #1 patient. So we just put together a recurring revenue stream for their #1 patients. By writing a script in the United States, they don't make anything. It's 0 revenues to the physician by writing a script. What's probably even less obvious is the beneficiaries, the economic beneficiaries that happen to have the greatest benefit from this is the insurers and the payers. Okay, so the insurance companies and the payers in the United States pay on average about $600 per patient per month for patients who are on IBS drugs, branded drugs. Okay, it's a $30 billion plus problem. Okay, and so with this, you can test them. They'll be off the drug for 6 months, 9 months, 7 months. And so you can see that every month that they're off the drug, that cash register rings by $600. So it is a very major benefit to the payers and insurers in the United States. This is where the rubber meets the road. And so prior to this month, we really didn't have this data. So I'm really pleased to be able to show you this. This shows all the FDA drugs and their efficacy as well as their safety limitations. So in the class of IBS-C, Okay, this IBS constipation. The two main drugs are Linzess and Amitiza. And you can see that, for example, Amitiza, when they did the study, 14% of the patients responded, 8% of the placebo response. Treatment response minus placebo response is efficacy. So it's 6%. You can see with Linzess, it's 7 to 14%. There's 20%, diarrhea side effects. Amitiza is only for women. Xifaxan. Now we're getting into IBS-D. 41% responded, 32% placebo response, 9% efficacy on that, not for chronic use, and this is for IBS-D. And you can go down there. From an efficacy standpoint, the best drug in the class is Lotranex. It has a black box warning. It can cause such serious side effects that it can kill people, and this is only for women. Let me show you the data that just came out of our clinical study for InFoods. And this is for IBS-C, constipation, IBS-D, and for the first time ever, IBS-M. And you can see that for all patients, the treatment response was 58%. The placebo response was 48%. So for all patients, our efficacy was 10%. Okay, better than many of the drugs there. Okay, and these are $2 billion drugs in the United States. Okay, and then for women, it was 58% and 43%. So remember, Lotranex was only for women. Amitiza was only for women. So you can see that we did as good or better than most of the drugs in the class. Here's us compared to Lotranex and in a study. And so you can see this is the best drug in the class. You can see that for diarrhea stool frequency, which is an FDA endpoint, the people who are on Lotranex, okay, and these are two published studies. You don't have to take my word for it. You can read these published studies. People on Lotranex had started out with about 4.5 bowel movements on average, and then took the drug for 12 weeks, went from 4.5 to about 2.8. The people who were on the diet in a different clinical study, okay, started out about 4.5 and removed foods that are causing an immune response above the normal level, according to our test, went from 4.5 to about 1.8. So we were able to reduce that. They had a 30% drop from baseline. We had a 65% drop. So almost 100% better than the best drug in the class. Okay. Sounds good, Zach, but how are you going to commercialize this, and when is it going to happen? And so I told you earlier that I'm not here to collect my paycheck, so it doesn't do me any good to have this drag on for a long time. So we want to commercialize this as soon as we possibly can and get doctors and patients the benefit of the technology. So we're launching a dual path approach to this. We completed our endpoint trial at Mayo Clinic, Harvard, University of Michigan, Texas Medical Center. The results are fantastic. I'm going to share it with you in a second. Okay. And we're going to launch with a clinical lab developed test. So it's a CLIA lab developed test. You do not need FDA approval to launch a CLIA lab developed test in the United States. We should hopefully have our first patients in sometime in December, January, and that is a pretty substantial revenue stream. What you probably don't know about the US market for GI doctors is there are 3 large groups. One group has over 350 employed GI doctors in the group. Another group has another 150. Another group has 700 doctors, okay, in the group. And so with 3 large groups, you can do over 10% of the US market. That means you don't need a sales force. You don't need to go out there and try to knock on every door. And so you can probably think about who we're targeting. At the same time, we're going to continue to do our pivotal trial to get FDA approval. So it's a dual path. You'll start seeing revenues, and I think these can be very substantial. We can talk about those and any questions that you might have. Let's get into the data. So the trial design was a multi-center, randomized, double placebo-controlled trial. So, for example, if a patient came into Mayo Clinic and they were in the part of the trial, they would be tested to see what foods they were positive to. So if the patient came in and they were tested positive to blueberries and almonds, and they got randomized in the treatment arm, they would eliminate blueberries and almonds. If they got randomized in the placebo arm, they'd eliminate raspberries and walnuts, assuming that they tested negative to raspberries and walnuts and consumed them at the same rate. So that is the placebo in our study, okay? How did we do? Well, for global endpoints, so for subjects' global assessment of relief, which is looking at abdominal pain, discomfort, or altered bowel function, overall well-being, we hit it out of the park. P-value 0.007. The lower the p-value, the more statistically significant the treatment arm was compared to the placebo arm. For GIS, which is Global Improvement Scale, again, really good. And this is for all three types of IBS. For pain and bloating, again, excellent numbers, okay? And I'm going to show you those numbers in a second, okay? This is treatment arm compared to the placebo arm. Remember, when I showed you that responder analysis compared to the drugs, we're doing as good or better than most of the drugs out there. And these are not, those drugs that I showed you on that list previously, they make up about $5 billion, okay, in drug costs. Okay. So this gives you a different graphical version of this, of our placebo compared to the actual true diet. So here's the guys who are on the placebo diet, which I explained earlier. And you can see at week 6, the placebo stops working completely and starts reverting back into pain, while in the true diet, where they eliminate the true foods, okay, they still get benefit. And you see the same thing happen in bloating. So this was pain. This is abdominal pain and index or pain intensity, okay? And this is bloating, the two hallmarks of IBS. And you see the same thing happening here. Again, take a look at the p-values here, extremely statistically significant, very, very good data. So that gets back to, okay, well, great. How are you going to drive adoption? So inclusion in the guidelines, we believe, is very important. If you take a look at companies like Exact Sciences, once they got inclusion in the guidelines, those companies really took off as far as sales. It just so happens that the Rome Foundation sets the worldwide guidelines for IBS. So you can probably see why we're so trying to be affiliated with them in every way possible when we design these studies, so that we are seeking to be in the guidelines. The reimbursement, if you're in the guidelines, you're going to get reimbursement coverage. But if you think about it from this standpoint, if you can get reimbursement and be in the guidelines, that is kind of the holy grail in the United States. And so we just monetized a physician's #1 patient type, okay, IBS. So GI's #1 type of patient is an IBS patient. And so being able to be in the guidelines and then be able to have a better outcome, we believe, is going to be very interesting for insurance companies to be allowing reimbursement, as well as this is a much, much lower cost than the drugs. Okay, and then if that's not enough, we went out and did a survey with GI doctors and PCPs, random doctors that we've never talked to, and we used the same firm, which is one of the $2 billion drugs used, and they asked them 40 different questions. 95% of GI physicians and PCPs said they would adopt InFoods IBS for their patient, depending on the subtype. That, my friends, is a very very interesting number. I won't tell you too much about the Rome Foundation. You can look it up by yourself, but they do set up the worldwide guidelines. InFoods is a platform technology. So IBS is our first disease indication, but you can look at the size of the functional dyspepsia market, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, migraines, dermatology. And if I showed you the data for dermatology or ulcerative colitis, I think you would be equally as impressed as our data with IBS. Next, we're going to switch over and talk about our specialty diagnostics. The reason we do specialty diagnostics is because it pays for all our overhead and keeps our burn rate very low. And that's why we're doing it. It also, we need to be able to produce these products, and we use the same lines, the same people, the same tools to produce the InFood products as we use for the specialty diagnostic line. So we talked about H. pylori. H. pylori is a little bacteria that causes ulcers and gastric cancers. 80% of gastric cancers are attributed to H. pylori, and gastric cancer is the third most common cancer death in the world today. We've submitted a 510(k) FDA submission. Okay, we're hoping for approval anytime now. So that's where we are with that, and I won't spend too much more time on that. Going to jump into colorectal disease and colorectal cancer screening. Okay, there's 3 ways to do colorectal cancer screening in the United States in the guidelines. You can do a colonoscopy every 10 years, you can do a Cologuard every 3 years, or you can do a FIT or easy detect test every year. Those are all equivalent. So I like to say, if you like to play with poop, you have a lot of options. If you don't want to play with poop or handle stool, easy detect is the only option. Here you have a bowel movement, you drop a pad on top of the water, you look for a color change. Any color change is positive, no color change is negative. You flush it down the toilet, you're done. Next question, of course, is, great, how much does it cost and how accurate is it? Well, take a look at the numbers and you can see that this is a great test and it's the easiest test to perform. And most importantly, more people will do it because you don't have to play with stool. Okay, let's jump into our breast self-exam product. And I think you're going to find this really interesting. This is the only FDA CE marked product for breast self-examination. 80% of breast cancers are detected because women themselves notice the changes, not from mammography, not from going into the doctor's office, women themselves. So if you could help them with a product that could let them differentiate what's truly a breast cancer and what's just normal, that would be fantastic. So here in an 832 patient study, you can see that the patients were almost as good as clinical trained nurses in finding breast cancers and different types of detections. And so you can see what the detection ratios are. So the product really helps. It's available at Walmart. So both these products, Easy Detect isn't available in almost every single Walmart store. And Where is available in about half the stores. They're also available on Amazon, and you can look to have these products be launched internationally as well as other US retailers is what we're working on. So in summary, you have a platform technology that addresses a very large market that has drugs that don't work very well, just simply put. Okay. The infused model is really unique because it really has a benefit to the patient, has obvious benefits to the physician because you just monetize their patients, but probably the most economic benefit comes to the insurer. It's not probably, it is. We have broad IP protection. We have a very low burn rate. We have a very clean capital table, and we have the opinion leaders in the US and internationally really helping us and putting our clinical studies together to ensure that we can get into the guidelines. That's it. And from there, I'll just open it up for questions.
So this is Florian speaking. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation, great introduction, I would say. I would like to start with your financials. Just on this slide, it says low burn rate.
Yeah.
So how are you on cash? How is your burn rate? Do you expect to need more funds at some point, or how does that look like?
So that's a great question. So, our burn rate is anywhere from break even to about, $1 million to $2 million a quarter, depending on what quarter we're in and what our sales are. So we believe with H. pylori coming online and InFoods as a laboratory developed product being launched, we're hoping that we're going to be able to get to a point where we're always break even and will not need to raise any more money. In the meantime, we do have enough runway for what we think is, there's no immediate cash need to do a raise right now. So, if it becomes attractive and opportunistic enough for us to do something, we'll do it. Are we going to ever do a deal with warrants and all kinds of derivatives? No, we don't believe in that. That's not what we do. We'd never take on a preferred or debt or anything like that. So I guess I'll leave it that we're opportunistic and believe that we'll get to, with the sales of these products, to a even lower burn rate or a break even.
Excellent, excellent. On your sort of sales strategy going forward, very often what happens with small companies, small biotechs, they have a drug or a test or something like that, and they want to go it alone, and they sort of go broke in the process because
Yes.
it doesn't work out.
Yes.
So what is sort of your strategy to mitigate that and to be successful, I would say?
Okay. Yeah, so I couldn't agree with you more. And I think what happens is most of these companies sit there and go, let's build the sales force. And if we build the sales force, all the doctors are going to want to use our product. And I think that the truth in that is that it takes a lot to change doctors' attitudes. It takes a lot to get doctors to try to switch things. So if you're going to be sitting there calling one doctor at a time, boy, you better buckle down and have a long runway to get sales. Our strategy is really going to these large GI groups, which, again, the GI doctors are employed by the groups. They are private equity owned companies, okay, which are looking to increase their bottom line. And so if we just provide a revenue stream, which they've never received before, for their number one type of patient, that in and of itself is interesting. I think that if we can help those groups retain those patients and provide a better experience for those patients and in a unique way to treat those patients, that's even more intriguing for those groups. So again, three mega groups in the United States make up over 12% of the market. We don't need to do, we're not going to be going on and knocking on, one office or two office doors. So that's how we differentiate ourselves from these other companies that are trying to, if we build it, they will come. We're getting inbound interest on InFoods all the time because of how unique the product is.
And can you maybe talk more about the competitive landscape, alternative solutions, or just like do it yourself? Like if I have IBS, why can't I just eliminate X, Y, Z food from a diet and then check back a few weeks later? So why do I need your test, your solution for that?
So I think that's a great question. So let's take the first self-elimination process. So there is a diet out there that's called FODMAP, okay? And it has 100 to 200 foods that you eliminate, okay? And then you introduce them one a week. So with 200 foods, it's going to take you, whatever, it's going to take you over 2 years, okay, to try to figure out what foods are problematic and what foods aren't. And so the success rate of the FODMAP diet, it's very difficult for the patient. It's very difficult for the doctor. And the success rate of patients really staying on it is low, okay? So you could do it yourself, but it's extremely difficult. You have to be very, very disciplined, and you need to be able to really be able to control trying to eliminate over 100 foods out of your diet all the time. Okay, so very difficult to implement. The competitive landscape is there's other companies, like for example, there's a company called Everlywell. They're a private company. They were founded in Shark Tank, or originally founded in Shark Tank. Their last raise was 175 million at a 1.3 billion valuation. I'm sure that the haircut is pretty significant from where they are today, but you can see that they got a lot of interest. And one of their main products is trying to figure out food sensitivities. The problem is that they're looking for 90 or 180 different foods and trying to figure out what foods, and they're using it for people who are bald, they're using it for people who are trying to lose weight, and they're using people who have IBS, and they're trying to use it for people. And the fact of the matter is, it's like we don't have a universal cancer diagnosis for all different cancers, and diseases are are individualistic to that specific disease state. So the doctors don't give it any credit. The medical community doesn't give it any credit. And so this is the first time you can see that a group like the Rome Foundation and Mayo Clinic and Harvard and all the medical community is rallying around a unique way to really identify foods that are causing inflammation at above normal level. Everything we do is science and data-based, and everything they do is guesswork. So those are the difference between what we're doing and the major competitors. And everything that we've done is we filed patents on.
Very good, very helpful. What would you say to critics who would argue that you had a good story for a long time, but didn't really get anywhere until this point?
Yeah. So I would say that, you know, and until you're trying to do groundbreaking, market changing technologies, then let me know how well that goes, especially when you're a microcap company and are not funded like we don't have, you know, $3 billion to kind of do what we're trying to do. We're doing it with a low burn rate. So is it going to take longer to do what we do? Yes. Is the reward very large on the other end? Yes. And I think that it took us this long to be able to get to the data. And before it was a guess. Would this work or will it not work? Who knows? They're still in clinical trials. With the clinical data out, you can not only see that it works, but it works better than some of the best drugs in the class. And remember, those drugs are selling $2 billion. You know, two of them are selling at $2 billion. That's $4 billion right there. And others are, you know, you're over $5 billion in just drugs. So I would tell the critics that, you know, it takes time to revolutionize a market and a technology, especially with a COVID pandemic and, you know, thrown in the middle of it.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair statement. Both statements actually. Although you have actually benefited in certain ways quite a bit from COVID, at least
Yes.
short term.
Yes.
Maybe you mentioned the reward is going to be that much bigger. Where do you sort of see yourself and the company in a few years? Do you think you will continue to go that alone? Do you see any bigger partnerships or potentially being acquired, or where would you see yourself in a few years?
You know, my hope is that if we're fortunate enough to get 1, 2, or 3 of these large groups, I think that we are going to become intriguing for other larger companies. And this asset, the IBS asset, will become intriguing for other large companies. And if we could partner up with someone to help us take that asset out to the other 90% of the market, or other, whatever it is, 85% of the market, right? Then fantastic. And we would do that. And then that would allow us to go into other disease states like ulcerative colitis or migraines or another, probably another GI disease state to be able to do the same thing that we just did, hopefully at a much higher valuation and hopefully without any type of burn rate. So that is kind of where we'd like to be. Now, do we get, you know, does someone making us offer that we can't refuse? Yeah, that, you know, stuff like that happens all the time. But my hope is that, you know, I truly believe, and that's why I'm here, and that's why I only make $135,000 and I buy more of the stock than I make. I really believe that we will become a multi-billion-dollar company in the next few years. That's why I'm here.
Very good. Sounds great. Sounds great. On your stock, can you maybe talk a little bit about the ownership? How much you yourself own? Are there any bigger shareholders?
Sure.
Funds, anything like that?
Yeah, so I think that on the cap table, I own about 10% of the stock. The next, I think, I don't know if I'm larger or they're larger, but the next largest shareholder is a group called Granahan. you may or may not know the group. It's they're a much larger fund, and typically not in these not in a small cap company like us. They were in other small caps like Exact Sciences that did extremely well for them, and so they're in to us and believe that we have a very large opportunity ahead of us, and that's why they own 9.9% of our company. I think you see other funds starting to come in and take notice about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So I think Wasatch was one of the latest ones, and I've spoken to their portfolio manager, their PMs over there, and hopefully you'll see more and more funds coming into the story, because it's a story of science, patent protection and need. So it's using science, diet, and technology to really revolutionize a marketplace. And I think time has come where we don't just pop a pill and try to, put a Band-Aid on something, but we actually try to resolve the issue. And that's what we're trying to do.
Very good. So before I open up for questions, just one last point about the product itself. So if I got tested and I found out that this and that food is just not good for me, and I scrap that from my diet, why do I need you then anymore? So is my problem then not solved?
Yeah. So here's what we've noticed. Okay. So if that patient's IBS was due to an enteric disease, so it was a non-organic, is what I term it. This is not an official term, okay? But I call it non-organic IBS. So someone developed IBS because they had salmonella poisoning or E. coli poisoning, and then they went on to develop IBS. Typically, once they figure out what food's causing inflammation, they remove it out of their diet, they go back to being normal. An IBS patient that was born with IBS and has had it and really has been struggling with it, what happens is that, let's say, I'm just going to keep it super simple. Let's say they were positive to milk and blueberries, and then they eliminated blueberries and milk out of their diet, and they substituted soy milk for their milk, soy milk for their milk, and raspberries for their blueberries. What typically happens is 9 months later, 7 months later, 12 months later, 3 months later, every patient's different, just like every patient has a different, positivity to different foods. Okay. They have a recurrence. Unfortunately for them, you could probably say fortunate for our investors. I'd love to be able to cure this, by the way. If I could cure it, I would be very happy, but it's unfortunate that we can't cure it. And they will have to get retested. So when they get retested, sure enough, they're positive for soy now. They remove soy out of their diet. They can reintroduce regular milk and see if that works for them, or they can go to almond milk. It's up to them and that doctor of how they were going to do that. But they're either on the drug for the rest of their life, or they're on a diet for the rest of their life, which changes. So they will need us.
Okay, very good, very good. So I do have one last question before I open it up. Can you
Sure.
just quickly go to the slide where you were comparing to placebo
Sure.
from your clinical study?
There you go.
I think
Okay.
that wasn't there one before that?
This is the placebo. You mean this one? Oops, sorry. This one here, right?
Right, exactly. So couldn't you make the argument that placebo here is very, very good, and you're actually not that much better? I mean, sure, it's 10 to 15%, but is that so significant?
Yeah, but take a look at here's Xifaxan, which is a $2 billion drug, 41 and 32%. So the placebo rates, and here's 34 and 27, right? So the placebo rates in IBS are known to be high. This is not, no one's shocked here, right? And it's typically based on what the response rate is. So I could flip that on its head and say, look at our response rate compared to the drugs. More people are responding to what we're doing than what the drugs are doing. So, yeah, we had a higher placebo rate. Okay, that's okay. But there is a difference. The key is there is a difference between the treatment response and the placebo response, and that difference is I'll show you here. You can see that here's the placebo group, and you can see at week 6 they start losing efficacy and start going back into pain, where by week 8 they're still having benefit from being on the true diet. Make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Fantastic.
Okay.
I actually can relate to this because I do have IBS. And so as you're going through, I'm just kind of thinking, through the process of being a potential user. And I'm just curious on this list of foods, what the size and scope of that is. And you were comparing it to the FODMAP, or I forget what the acronym is there, in the things that they have. And I can attest to the fact that nobody actually spends the time and effort to go through that. It feels like a nauseating idea to try to isolate things out individually. So having an actual test that just tells you what to take out um, certainly is interesting. But I'm curious the size and scope of the items that you're testing for.
Yeah. Okay. So good question, and sorry to hear that you have it. But if you ask almost anyone who's in, that's near you, they or someone they know has IBS because it's just so prevalent. So again, what makes InFoods different is we looked at and said that our hypothesis was, is there foods that are problematic for IBS patients and not problematic for normal patients? So we started out and we said, let's take all the most commonly consumed foods, 90 of the most commonly consumed foods, and see if there's anything that pops out on IBS patients that looks different than in normal patients. Okay. And sure enough, we found some. And then what we did is we further refine that using false discovery analysis and all kinds of biostatistics to say, let's make sure we take all the false discovery out of this. Let's make sure that we duplicate these results in multiple cohorts so that we come out with a panel of foods that makes sense to test for IBS patients. That's not the same panel of foods that you're going to test for ulcerative colitis patients, or patients who have dyspepsia, or patients who have migraines, or patients who have any dermatology. Every single disease state's different, and the cutoff for each food is different. So what creates a positive or negative for blueberry is completely different than what creates a positive or negative for egg, which is completely different, which would create a positive or negative for egg and blueberry in a different disease state. So everything we did was science and technology driven, so that when we present to Mayo Clinic or the FDA, which, by the way, the first question the FDA will ask you if a company was going to come up and say, we want to do this, the first question they'll ask you is, that's fantastic. How did you come up with the panel of foods that you're going to test for? And if the answer is we randomly selected some foods that were the most commonly consumed, they would say, that's a nice answer, but come back when you have a scientific approach of how you selected that panel. And that's exactly what we did. That's exactly how we're different. And so we measure it not to food classes, but to the specific food. So it is chicken, it is blueberry, it is egg, it is cabbage, it is garlic, it is lemon, it is to the specific food of the most common IBS trigger foods. Do we hit all of them? No. If someone eats a lot of dragon fruit, we didn't test for dragon fruit. So could dragon fruit be a problem for that person? Yes, it could. Would we miss it on our test? Yes, we would. But would we probably help them still very significantly because they're probably positive to one of the most commonly consumed foods? Most likely, yes.
Excellent. Just another follow-up question. Is there any impact on the test for individuals that have other conditions, diseases, etc.? And so I'll just throw an example out there. What if you had a patient that had IBS, lactose intolerant, acid reflux, all those different things that a lot of these GI patients have? Does that
Yep.
matter or impact the testing at all?
Yeah, so if they were lactose intolerant, that's not going to matter. Typically they already know that, so they're already eliminating milk out of their diet, right? Or lactose out of their diet, so they might be doing lactose-free milk, right? If they had GERD, which is acid reflux, then if they're eliminating any foods, we would have them continue to eliminate the foods. What we're looking for is foods that are related specific to their IBS symptoms. And that's what makes this different, okay? It's not going to help them for any of the other things. Now, would we have a GERD panel? Yes. If they wanted to get help for foods with GERD, we could probably help them with that once we come up with a GERD panel. Will it have the same foods as the IBS panel? No. Will it have the same cutoffs, even if it had the same foods? So for example, I think, and I'm not sure about this, but I think egg is in the GERD panel. It will be a completely different cutoff. So what would be positive for egg in an IBS patient would be different than in a GERD patient. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
And then last question for me. Florian asked this and you answered, but I'm just curious if you have any more specifics on, you get tested as a patient the first time, you get your results, you do these things, it presumably helps you. You said people will come back as they continue to have symptoms or things evolve. What is the kind of normal guidelines on how often folks actually get tested, how often patients are getting tested with this?
Yeah. So we don't have an answer for all patients do have to get tested every 6 months. That's not the answer. It's whenever the patient has a recurrence in symptoms. So for one patient, they go out and they eliminate the foods, and 7 months later, sure enough, they're starting to feel like, gosh, this seems like it's back again. I mean, I thought I whipped this thing. I felt really good for 7 months, and now something's up, something's wrong. And they come back and they get, sure enough, tested again, and they figure out that one of the foods that they substituted is problematic, or they have another food that's problematic, so they have to eliminate that food and substitute another food. And that unfortunately happens for these patients. But there's no guideline on, hey, you got to get tested everything. On average, you're going to get tested, call it 1.2 times a year.
Okay. I might add one more question. You were saying the two different paths that you have to get this into the patient's hands, that top line or bar, I forget what you were calling it. When is that likely going to be introduced into the market?
Yeah, so this is a CLIA laboratory developed test. It does not require FDA approval. We hope to have that test in the marketplace December or January. So we'll start generating revenues that quick. And this gets back to the other question of, Zach, you've been at this for a long time. Why now? Well, why now is because, not only have we done it with the leading groups, not only are we talking to, some of the largest groups, but it's the products coming into the marketplace.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
I just had a quick follow on to that. Since December's tomorrow, or at least the beginning of December, kind of what are maybe the last one or two things that need to get buttoned up in order for that practically imminent launch to occur? Thanks.
So I don't want to go off to where we're going to talk about details about what we need to happen to get that done. There is a full Gantt chart of different steps that need to happen for us to get launched and hopefully launch with one of these larger groups. And so that is non-public information, so I want to be careful there. But I can tell you that we're working on validating the assay in the laboratory, getting it up and running, making sure we can get samples. We're doing all the things that we need to do to get this up and running and off the ground. Right, as we speak.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir. I know you mentioned something about the burn rate being a little bit variable, and I can appreciate that. I don't know, did you specifically say how much liquidity the company has at this point in time, looking out versus the burn rate? Is there a particular liquidity number you can cite?
Yeah, so our last cash position was call it around $5 to $6 million. And so depending on what our burn rate is for a quarter, so if it's $1 million, then you know what that looks like. If it's zero, then you know what that looks like. If it's two, then you know kind of what that is. So it's hard to determine, but my hope is that with H. pylori, with the CLIA laboratory developed test and what we're doing, hopefully having some international participation with Easy Detect, our colorectal cancer screening product and our colorectal disease product, and the breast self-examination product internationally, then I think that hopefully, is a good number for us from a cash standpoint. Could we use more cash, and would we love to have more cash? Yeah. Do we have to do something right now in this market? No.
Do you
It's gonna
foresee
be
a greater need for cash as you come to market in the next couple of months with the product you were discussing? Would that increase? the need for
no,
cash?
because our approach is let's go after the large groups. It's not to go after. We don't want to continue to build, salespeople and continue to, feed the sales network that we have. It's really the only thing we do is if they wanted us to implement faster into a different, let's hope that this happens. Then, do we have to hire more customer service people or implementation people? Possibly, but we're not talking about large numbers. We're talking about pretty small numbers, which would be hopefully offset pretty significantly with the revenues that would be coming through for those implementations.
And you obviously have high margins. That way, your inventory cost versus what you make off the product must be very attractive, right? With the
Yes,
business.
it's extremely effective. Yeah.
Okay, that explains that. I was just thinking, yeah, I haven't had a chance to look in very deep into what y'all's numbers. So thank you.
Sure. Well, great.
So
Go ahead.
sorry, a last one from me, a tough one. You said you own a bit more than 10% of the company.
I think it's with my options and everything else. Then yeah, it's around 10%. It might be 9, or I haven't got the latest cap table.
Yeah, that's fair, of course. That goes actually to my question. How much of that did you sort of buy yourself in the market, and how much was in terms of compensation and options and what have you?
I bought all of that in the marketplace. So I mean, I might have received options. So I make $135,000, and the board might give me an option to buy whatever it is, 100,000 shares, right? But it's not at a discount. It's at market. So whatever the market is what I bought it at. Now, if the company has gone from, when I bought it, and I bought some, early on in the early days, I was buying shares at $1.50, and so forth. So was I buying it then? Yeah, but I was still putting my money to work to own those shares. There's no share grants, in other words.
A
Yeah,
follow-up
very
on
good.
the income. You mentioned your income being fairly modest, which I can appreciate. Have you and other officers lowered your incomes in the past years to preserve capital, or has it always been that low?
It's always been that low. No, and I believe in this model. I believe that there's too many companies that are out there, and the CEOs and the management teams. Main purpose is to raise as much money as they possibly can to continue to receive the check that they make. Whether it be $500,000 or $1 million a year or whatever the number is. That's not, I think, in line with shareholders. So I want to put myself in line with the shareholder primarily, our shareholders primarily. And if I create value and I create significant value, then great, I'm rewarded with a very, healthy equity position. But so is the rest of the management team, and every person at this company has an ownership position. We give options to people who are lab techs that do a lot of grunt work, because we want them to be owners in the company. So I believe in that model where people feel like they're an owner in the company, are going to put a lot more of their heart and soul into it than, hey, I'm here to collect a check.
You're right. That is very commonplace for sure. The overpaying thing.
I think that was great.
Great. No, thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it. If you guys think of any other questions, by all means, just shoot me an email and we'll either shoot back a response or arrange a call. And so I really appreciate this opportunity to present to you today.
Yeah, it was great having you. Thank you very much for answering all of our sometimes tough questions. And
No,
for the
good questions.
presentation.
Yeah. Good. No, thank you.
Okay. Thanks,
All right.
everybody. And
Okay.
see you soon.
Thanks.
Some or all the speakers may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast. The views in this podcast expressed are those of the speakers and not breakout investors. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Neither breakout investors nor any of its affiliates makes any representation or warranty, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the statements or any information presented by this podcast and any liability, including in respect of direct, indirect, or consequential loss or damage, therefore is expressly disclaimed. No one on this podcast is an investment advisor, and no one is providing investment advice. Before investing in any company's stock, you must do your own research. Thank you for listening.